we were conscious about climbing off the leadership kind of soapbox without abandoning our leadership soapbox. So we've got very strong credentials in leadership and leadership development, but it has become, as INSEAD says, a bit of a red water. There are more books now on leadership development than I think, if you added them all together, they've probably outprinted the religious texts. And there is something of a cult around leadership that we're trying to figure out. So we step back and we look at management. And through this year, we've been asking ourselves, what is management at different levels and what is the work and so on. It's not so sexy, but what's it about? And we've looked at managers and strategy, managers and org design, managers and change, managers and leadership, of course. And now in September, we're looking at managing teams, managing and coordinating teams. Welcome, Dumisani. Good to see you.
Thank
The
you.
question we are triggering the conversation tonight with is probably an interesting one, given, Cecil, how you opened up. You know, when you said, I think before we started recording, you said that intersection of humans and that human dynamic and that human thread is so important. I was listening to somebody speaking from the perspective of agile, really anchored in the kind of agile manifesto, and speaking against the notion of management completely. So just basically rejecting the idea of the need for middle management. So in this supposedly obvious conversation about managing and coordinating teams, the question I asked myself is, if managers are disappearing, who coordinates the team? And I kind of followed that on with, if teams are disappearing, who's doing the work? And we know where that's going to go. I mean, I don't want to try and pretend that I'm doing a big reveal around the information age and AI. But there is, there's something to ask there around, what does coordination mean now? And who is it that's being coordinated now? So that sets us up for the cafe. As you've already tasted, Varsha, these cafes are not webinars. We are really colleagues or clients exploring ideas together. Dumi, I hope you can hear me. I think I heard you cough, so I guess your audio is good. So it's a thinking space, a conversation, a shared investigation. I will do a bit of trigger talk, but mostly I'm interested in hearing you guys. So what are we seeing? Agile and self-managing teams do challenge the notions of supervision entirely. Fine. So let's put that on the table. Then we know that managers used to do quite a lot of linking work. So linking teams with other teams or linking people with other people. But platforms and dashboards are replacing quite a lot of that linking work. We know that AI can monitor, summarize, and analyze more information than humans can in many cases. And we know that flatter structures offer improved speed and cost. So does removing the manager remove the need for consideration? Kind of structure of my content after I've checked in with you guys will be, what makes team coordination difficult? What is it that we're trying to coordinate? How does coordination happen? What can now be done by systems or AI, and what can't? And to get us kind of going, I want to share this slide with you and ask you, Cecil, Dumisani, Solani, and Varsha, just to stay in here and give us a few thoughts on this question. Let's see. It'll be that screen share. Hopefully you're seeing it. So in your experience, what does best coordinate the work of teams? And what doesn't work so well? That means you might think that it is managers, that it is still people, Cecil. Or, somebody else might have the perspective that it is self-directed teams. We don't need managers. They need to huddle, communicate well, and figure things out together. Some of you might be on the cutting edge of this, where teams are being directed, or groups are being directed by the system or by AI. And I don't know that that's as cutting edge as it sounds, because we'll unpack that a bit later. Is it professional standards? Is it shared norms? What is it that coordinates the works of teams? If you had a thought on that, what would it be?
What do you mean by an informal leader?
What does it strike up in your head, Varsha?
Maybe someone who's like, sort of not a direct leader in terms of a reporting structure, but someone who is perhaps cross-functional. And yeah, so when I look at the word informal, it's not really formalized in terms of the actual organogram that we see in org design. But someone who's got the influence to be able and the ability to be inspiring and guide and lead the team towards one goal.
And in your experience, is that the best? Yes, I agree that you understand what it is. And the reason I left it open, Varsha, was that maybe it sparked a different thought for you, and it might have generated a different option here. So if leadership is not a job title, then we must assume that leaders can emerge from within teams or across teams or from any position, and that would be the informal leader. And we're kind of maybe being a bit pedantic by saying the informal leader, but what we're trying to stress is it's not the boss, it's not the manager, it's not the executive, it's not a position. And you're most likely to see it in self-directed team settings, I would think. So what, in your experience, best coordinates teams? I've been working on a team at the moment, team design for a client session that's coming up. And, as an Enneagram 8, I'm a real control freak. And I want the coordination of that team to be overt. I want to see how it's being coordinated. I need structure. There's other personalities in that team who don't have the same need for me. So in my experience, I like to have a clear manager. I like to have some kind of standards or structure, some shared norms in a team, and that helps me coordinate the work that needs to be done. I even like to have a spreadsheet or a task list, or who's doing what. When I watch the Springboks lose against the All Blacks on Saturday, and some of the blame was around. Russie, the coach, took some responsibility for not, preparing the team in the right way. So he's really setting himself up as some kind of coordination role there as the manager, I guess. I'm going to push you once more just to see if you've had any thought of, when you look at some of the best teams you've ever worked in or with, what coordinated them?
I think for me, Craig, has been a combination of factors. And it differs also from team to team. It doesn't mean that probably other teams might find that they had, that I had experience with, we had a very, I don't want to say strong leadership, but they had the leadership that they can rally behind and be able to do the stuff that needed to be done with clear roles. and responsibilities, and also a shared goal that is basically understood by every member of that particular team. If not, other members were more than prepared to share that and get everybody behind so that they can get wherever they need to get. I think it's a what you call it, it's in a state of flux in a way. It depends on the level of maturity of the team. It depends also in terms of what each team member is seeing her role, or is basically defining his or her role within that particular team. So those combination of factors, in some other teams they work, in some other teams you might find one or two are present, but the team still doesn't work. And you find that in that particular team, what has made that team probably not to work might be something that is critical for that particular team. It might be things like psychological safety, or it might be previous experience people have gone through and things didn't work, or whatever the case might be. So for me, it's in a state of sort of a flux and complexity at the same time, that yes, there are certain things that you need to have there, but also when those things are there, they still needs to be. It's like when you're having ingredients to bake a chocolate cake, you still need to put those ingredients together.
I think you're on it, Demi. But and I guess that's the reason for the specificity of this question. You have to think of a team you worked in, and then immediately you become aware of that's not always generally true, but at least you can say in this setting that worked.
Yes,
Otherwise
that's why.
you end up having to provide a very wide shopping list of things that might generally be true, but we can't tell what kind of team it is.
That's why, Craig, I was saying earlier on, in the number of teams that I've worked with, it's some of them you find that because of a strong leadership, we've been able to pull through and achieve what needs to be achieved. But not only strong leadership. In those particular teams that I'm thinking about here, it was basically strong leadership, basically members who really understand what's supposed to be achieved, and people in terms of their level of maturity dedicated in making the thing work. But that is one team. But I've worked in a number of other teams where those three things were there, but we didn't achieve what we wanted to achieve.
Cecil, you want to build on that? Thanks, Jimmy.
Yes, I think if I had to create or design a situation where a team comes together or exists and needs to be coordinated, then based on my experience, I would say the manager is the one with whom I would like to assign the responsibility and accountability for coordinating. I think all of the other elements here are very helpful, and I don't dismiss any of them because they can all play a really important coordination role. But even like shared project boards or dashboards or whatever, I presume that's in a system/AI box. All of those are supporting properties, dimensions. But what best coordinates it, in my view, is the manager.
Varsha and Solani, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm aligned to that. And also I'm wanting to go and expand the manager word to managerial leader. And yeah, because it's a combination of both, and I know the differences between the two. But really, it's four things in my head that has worked for me in the past: offering clear purpose and direction towards one common goal and vision, ensuring that all of the team members are clear around their accountabilities and their roles, the roles and the specific accountabilities and the authorities or decision-making, power that's linked to that particular role. Understanding that each of them knows how to go about engaging their workforce and unlocking that discretionary effort. And the last component of it is continuous improvement. continuously improving it through every cycle of plan, do, check, and act. I guess I'm drawing on Deming's cycle here. But really, that's in my work, I've worked with many engineers, and that works really, really well. 4 basic things, and we keep improving, get the feedback, build the feedback into the next cycle of actually doing this. And all of this is happening in the context of fast-paced change, so the environment is dynamic. But amidst that dynamic and fast-paced environment, it is these 4 things that keep us focused. And you've got to start with that clear purpose and direction. Especially when there's so much of change going on like it is at the moment and has been for a number of years. It's what keeps us focused on our North Star.
Thank you, Varsha. And that's, I think, I love the way that you put it out so clearly. And in my mind, I'm holding you in the context of these kind of corporate environments that you've worked in, mining, FMCG, in these industries and moving into banking. I know Jimmy's Jimmy could be facilitating in one setting on Monday and a different setting on Tuesday. But yeah, let's have a look at what I've got and see whether this opens it up. I think what I heard was kind of an agreement, at least between Jimmy, Cecil, and Varsha, that the manager / leader, hopefully we all agree that a manager who is also a good leader is such a treat. So we've got this manager leader role. None of you really felt that self-directed teams are the way to go, but I guess that's because nobody on the call is coming from that core of that agile space. And none of you really voted for the process or system. I think Cecil put that as an enabler, but definitely not a key coordinator. So I guess part of this is, let's get this piece out of the way. We're inclined to think about managers as if their lives are structured. And when they're not. Mintzberg writes beautifully about the 9 conundrums of managers. And here's a few of them. We imagine managers having separation between planning and doing, and actually they have to figure out how to plan and do all at the same time. They're supposed to be connecting people, but they're often removed from the direct flow of the work while they're busy in connecting and meeting and liaising and linking and doing the other things that they do. Sometimes those managers can be a little, shall we say, divorced from the work. Trying to figure, managers are supposed to measure what matters. And as Varsha said, things are getting faster and faster. And it's sometimes difficult to isolate what it is that they're supposed to be measuring. They're supposed to be delegating, but they're still accountable. How do they act as if they're certain when they're so often caught in ambiguity? And how do they lead and drive the kind of pace of change that we're all experiencing and preserve some continuity? So managers are already holding a great deal of tension. Well, now we can ask, who are these managers? Is it a human or is it something else? AI can help with those tensions, but it might just move them somewhere else. So what are we talking about when we say coordination? Because I've got a feeling that in that opening group, you were kind of looking at the coordination question as, well, what do we mean by coordination? So 3 things broadly have to be coordinated in the context of a team within itself and a team in relation to the rest of the organization. One is information. So specifically communicating, making sure that we are getting the right information to the right people at the right time, and also making sure that the wrong information is not going to the wrong people, at any time. So what must people know, notice, report, interpret, and use to steer action is the first plane of coordination of managerial work. a plane below that is people themselves. So there is leadership, of course. Every manager is so much greater if people are actually following them rather than obeying them. So if a manager is able to lead, that's marvelous. And then linking people. So leading and linking people is a coordination activity. And getting the actual work done. So who gets resources, who gets the new laptop, who gets the petrol to drive to site, what work gets to be done, how's it secured, how's it negotiated, and how's it moved? How do I get resources from other teams into this team? When do I allow my team to work with other teams? 3 planes of coordination. We can take it as read that we automatically assume that a manager is doing all of these. That's, I guess, the conclusion we've reached. A manager is doing these things. So just a reminder that there is this boundary piece to the management. So inside the team, work, roles, meetings, across the organization, silos, cross-cutting the silos, dependencies, resource allocations, and into the outside world. So dealing with customers, suppliers, regulators, markets. Again, we assume there's a human being doing this coordination work. How does it happen? How do we coordinate? And here we get to something of the meat. So obviously coordination doesn't always mean the manager tells people what to do. And the default assumption about coordination is direct supervision, where somebody will tell people where to go or suggest where to go, check that they have gone there in the kindest possible way, and correct, hopefully developmentally and kindly, if they need some help. So there's the classic view of direct supervision. But there's also mutual adjustment. When that rugby team gets on the rugby field, no one there to do direct supervision anymore. They have to sense what's going on, and they have to watch each other, and they actually react to what each other is doing, coordinating through conversation or observation and feedback in play, more as a self-managed team in that moment than a managed team. They're managing through relationship, through an awareness of each other. And there are many organizational settings and social settings where mutual adjustment is actually how people coordinate. There's no Russie on the field, as much as he'd like to be there with lights and codes. In play on the day, that team is self-managing, self-directing. And that's not the end of the story either. Some groups coordinate through standardized work. So call centers. I mean, I know the call centers all have a team leader and so on, but really the main method of coordinating the work there is training. People are trained on how to handle certain processes, and they execute those processes. So the coordination mechanism is the standardized work. And the manager's job is to make sure that that work is standardized adequately and that the training is happening properly so people are skilled to deliver on that work. I want to jump one to standardized skills. So here we're talking about professional skill as opposed to kind of standardized work. Nurses, doctors, lawyers, engineers, where you have to maintain a professional registration. It's a really discrete group where actually the coordination comes from the standardization of that skill. Nurses are to some extent interchangeable on teams in hospitals. Doctors are, as we all know nowadays, increasingly somewhat interchangeable. If you happen to be in a different town and you've hurt yourself, you'll go and see a doctor. So training and professional capability, registration coordinates. You know, if you're the manager and you know you have to hire an engineer, the first thing you look for is the PRN status. And then, you're getting an engineer. If you have to hire a doctor for a hospital, or if you have to hire a nurse or a lawyer, you look for the fact that they are articled and pass the bar. So coordination there is through the standardization of skill. Then we've got the two remaining standardized outputs. And this is where what we consider to be a kind of a project team sits. They don't know how they're going to create the new piece of software, but they do know what the software is supposed to do. So they're going to cooperate in order to deliver a result. And it's the result that coordinates the effort. They keep measuring their work against whether or not they've moved closer to the project goal. And then, of course, standardized norms, community groups, communities of practice, somewhat collegial settings where shared values and assumptions will coordinate behavior. Culture, really, in its truest sense, is what's coordinating, and there's some kind of indoctrination process. The question, when you think about it in your own setting or in any given team, is to get to the question of what mechanism is doing too much work, what's doing too little. Obviously, there's no pure settings, or there are very few pure settings, but in any team, we are able to isolate, given the industry and the nature of the division, what is how coordination is happening. Real life example. Tomorrow we go on site on a strategy gig for a group. They're an information technology unit inside a very large insurance business. And they are, they're almost the size of a company in their own right, but they just do the IT work for that unit. And they're kind of concerned that their top team is not functioning well as a team. What's interesting in the diagnosis is that they operate two separate things. They operate the run part of the IT infrastructure, and they operate, let's call it simplistically, the build, so the new projects. And that management team is made up of representatives of both sides, run and build. Now, hopefully it's not too much to see that one of them has to work on relatively standardized work with direct supervision. They've got to run the infrastructure. It's very kind of CapEx dependent. They can put a budget in and they'll get some new application layers or whatever it might be as they need them. It's a run space. The build project side is about standardized outputs. It's much more complex. It runs on a different clock. And so the coordination of those two doesn't gel, and so they clash. And any attempt to try and manage them as one is likely to fail. Which mechanism is doing too much work and which is missing is a conversation that's more useful, and why doesn't this function as one team? So coordination doesn't always mean the manager tells people what to do, but it does mean how do things kind of click in these different settings. So given that, because again, that's relatively old news, it's not new. Now we're in the information age and AI is coming. So where does AI hit us? And what we will expect when you stop to think about it is AI would hit us everywhere where we've got the word standardized, except for standardized norms. So where culture might be binding us, that's not easily codified, but standardized skills are in a relatively easy space. So AI is breaking into those teams where that knowledge is codified enough that people can become professionally registered, and AI is hitting us where the work is standardized enough. So that would be any professional services firm that relies on a 3-tier structure. So senior partner, junior partner, intern. Those bottom 2 layers are mostly doing standardized work. It would have to be. That's how the leverage model works in those professional services firms. And those standardized work layers would be easily attacked by AI. AI can both coordinate the work and do the work. So it attacks their cleanly. So what does that mean? I mean, managers, we know, are supposed to apply judgment, meaning, conflict, and accountability. If I read another assessment on AI, which reads, beware, as the bottom right here, it's currently dangerous when metrics replace judgment. So this thing that says, well, at least we'll still need humans for judgment. I think that's just to make us feel better, because I suspect that increasingly, at least in differing levels of judgment, are being taken up there as well. So yeah, managers' judgment, meaning, maybe, conflict and accountability. Teams, are they in and of themselves able to do the mutual adjustment, peer learning, and local action? Well, actually, more and more enabled by systems and AI, I think the answer is yes. In another client we're working with, there's an opportunity to take out not a managerial layer, but certainly a managerial forum that was serving no other role than an information gathering and redistribution hub. And they're just late on the digital curve. As soon as they can get back onto the digital curve, the digital platform will do a much better job than those managers have ever been able to do in distributing real-time information to the people, in this case, professionals who need it. So more and more teams would be able to make mutual adjustment, less reliant on central management, and more free to move. So again, I think the manager role still comes back up to, what do the managers need to do? So yeah, AI doesn't remove the conundrums of management. It does change where they show up, and some of them show up nicely there. So, okay, we get to the obvious thing then, which is maybe the answer is not no managers, but it is a question of what coordination work actually creates value and who does it best. What is the human judgment? So I've used this as a provocation to try and challenge this idea that, yeah, you need a human manager to do this coordination. Hopefully it's given you a little bit of traction on a thought, and I'm hoping you want to come back and take me on some of it. So realizing now more clearly that you may be speaking about different contexts, and pushing you as colleagues and as pros in the space to be like, in this space, I still think the manager has to work, or maybe in those spaces, maybe managerial work is kind of overgeared and overused. I don't have an answer to this, by the way, and I'm certainly not trying to sell anything on it. But I'm moving from org design assignment to strategy work, back to org design, back to strategy work, into some change work. It's all got the same theme. And at the heart of it, one of the questions is, what are the managers supposed to be doing? And what are the teams supposed to be doing, such as there are still teams left? And this whole conversation is bound up in there. And I'm not sure that the old answer was, yeah, we can just, it's going to be the manager and the team, and they just carry on coordinating as they used to. So I'll stop sharing and look at faces and see if I've bored you, if it's blindingly obvious, if you know what the answer is, or if you are in the same conundrum as I am. Where is this heading?
Craig, I think you're pointing on in such an important conversation, because there is so much that AI is doing from a routine point of view. And I do like the work, the topic coordination, that you've started off with, because really, in my mind, the manager leader is really working towards that coordination, but it's still the individual is still working towards inspiring the team towards that clear purpose and vision. And you spoke about judgment earlier. And sometime last month, I presented on a keynote panel at the CIOPSA conference around the human AI interface. And the conversation topic was centered around the contribution of AI towards IO psychology and psychologists. And we specifically spoke about interpretive judgment. And I know you've mentioned it as judgment, but I'd like to speak more about interpretive judgment, because I do believe that, across all touch points of the employee value chain or the employee life cycle, the manager is actually the greatest conduit towards engagement of the team members. Firstly, we know that from many, many statistics and lots of research that has been done in the field. But the manager is really focused on understanding the subtle innuendos of and nonverbal reactions and behaviors of the team. And this is where the role of interpretive judgment comes in. And I do agree with you that it may seem like AI is doing more of that judgment. But I'm also questioning whether it's mimicking the judgment or whether the judgment, interpretive judgment, is authentic. So yeah, sorry, you're on mute. Couldn't hear what you said. So that's really where my mind is vacillating at the moment around, all of what you've put onto the screen, particularly your last slide. Yeah, so thank you so much for setting up this conversation around coordination, because I do think that it is confusing when you are sitting as a manager or leader at the moment. You've got your teams, you're asking yourself the question, what are they accountable for? What am I accountable for as a leader? What is AI doing in terms of taking on some of that work? And yeah, I think just bringing it back to the human being. This is where the interpretive judgment comes in. And obviously I'm speaking in my capacity as an IO psychologist, but I mean, you obviously have managers that are not in that field, and I'm keen and I'm curious to know what their thoughts are.
Cecil, you might be coaching some of these managers, and without revealing any privilege, have you got any insight into where they're at?
Where the leaders are at.
Yeah.
So I hear Varsha speaking of judgment, interpretive judgment, and I think that is important. This conversation for me, though, the framing of this conversation is in coordination. And so I'm focusing on that in particular. And I think there is work and tasks and projects to be coordinated, and there is people who perform those tasks to be coordinated. Like Varsha, I'm going to go with the people side. But Craig, just to backtrack a little bit, I mean, those dimensions of centralized, and everything, there is an assumption or a context there, and this is something I learned from the OD Cafe, around the fundamental forms of organizations. That makes a dramatic difference to how you would answer those questions. Programmed machine, absolutely, standardized. Professional assembly, different, project pioneer. And I mean, you went to rugby, and Mintzberg offers rugby as one of the project pioneer types of teams, and so on. So to our experience more currently, it makes all the world of difference when we coach a team, one team in particular, where there's toxicity swirling all the time. There's backstabbing and all kinds of stuff happening between people. And each one of them says, we're not a team. We need to be a team. And then when you let them unpack what that means, they've got vastly different expectations of what a team should be. And save us, some of them even talk about family. We need to be a family. So we just bypass that one, stay with team, just acknowledge there are many different types of teams for different types of organizations. And I think that's quite important when we talk about the coordination role. As you were speaking now, I actually pulled up my little graphic of the 4 fundamental types, because it feels like even those fundamental organizational types are changing. And I mean, I value the model a lot and use it a lot. And I'm not sure, I mean, as you said, in program machine, we're standardized, it's becoming less necessary for the direct supervision and control down the chain, because there are other things that are filling that space. So without going too wide and general, for me, coordination, and this is my bias, tends to be coordinating the people. Back to what Varsha said, the people factor, not so much about the judgment, but the reading of the emotional field. Looking at the relationship system. And for coordination, I'm sort of substituting the word alignment, because on the people side, it is about alignment. And it's about the manager having the view, standing back and sensing what is happening between people and helping and facilitating conversation and coordination between them. Yes, a self-management team would be great. It always happen in organizational context. So yeah, for me, the manager there. And one manager I'm coaching now is quite a senior manager, an executive, and he's expanding. I mean, there's an acquisition and a merger happening and whatever. And it's suddenly his role is just expanding massively. And there's just a transition of supervising people with checklists, standard work procedures, SOPs, all those things, which are brilliant, I must say, and have served this person very well, served him very well through two and a half decades of work. That's not the currency that he's going to be working with now. And I think the Neuro Leadership Institute has got a nice little model, choose your focus, starting from, okay, they've got a sketch around coaching in particular, and that is when the employee, the team member, comes and puts a problem on the table, the manager looks at the problem. And I think the skilled manager looks up and looks at the person, and it doesn't matter what the problem is, but coordinating the people and what's happening in their heads and in their hearts in that kind of space. And that's a challenging. You might say, okay, that sounds like leadership. I don't know. I think it is management also. Sorry, a bit of a long ramble just to tell you what's happening in my head. You're muted again, Craig.
It's the WorldsView Conversation Café, Cecil. So it's not another forum where long rambles are discouraged. Jimmy, is there anything you want to bring in?
Yeah, I think from my side, Craig, first and foremost, in terms of what is our unit of analysis here, which is basically coordination within the space or within a context, which is the work environment. And then for me, then I see that coordination happening or required in all the what you call the management functions. You know, when you talk about planning, organizing, staffing, controlling, all that. So it is coordination that happens within a particular context, and as a result, what we are seeing here is the working together in a sort of like a seamless way to achieve whatever is the stated goals that we need to achieve. If I look at, in our case, more especially within the academia kind of space, we do have what we call areas of specialization as a matter of separation in a way. And if those areas of specialization are not coordinated properly, you end up basically having silos, and you end up having one department or one unit pushing in a different direction. As a result, then, hence I see the importance of coordination. In our space, it will be in terms of the things that we have mentioned earlier on, standardization of skills, and making sure that if we are saying, is whatever, somebody who have attended public management, those people will need to have even similar sort of like standardization of what you call forgotten this word, but it was one of the last element that you mentioned there. So within that, it's within a professional setting that requires a lot in terms of focus, in terms of standardization of skills, norms, yes, standardization of norms in terms of how do you behave in that particular environment.
Thank you, Jimmy. Am I muted or am I unmuted at the moment?
Good.
You can hear me, because I've shared the slide. I've lost a bit of a screen. So I want to come back there a little. I mean, firstly, I acknowledge the beauty of the idea that at the sharp end of the stick, the manager, and I'm going to use the word subordinate. It's awkward, but it's the people who report to the manager, and that's a bit clunky. So the manager-subordinate relationship is human to human, and at its best expression, that's where we see the power and the beauty of management. I think Varsha put it as the manager is the greatest conduit to employee engagement and to that kind of heart-to-heart, eye-to-eye moment.
Yeah.
Yes, and Varsha, yes, and you're heading into banking. We've just come out of a wonderful, I don't know, over about 14 months, nice deep engagement with one of the big banks. All the banks are running change programs at the moment, Varsha. I don't think there's a bank or any large institution that is not running multiple collisional, often digital-based, market-shifting change programs that are, in many cases, rooted in org design. And what shocked us was the treatment of the managers in those change programs. Varsha, it surprised me to find out that most of the managers were treated like the affected population. There was no separate track in the org design and change programs for the managers outside of whoever were the executives on the team and whatever they brought on as their kind of change leader, change sponsor network. Outside of that, so in an employee population of whatever, 12, 14, 16, 20,000 people, multi-divisional managers were treated like employees in the change programs. So on the one hand, we have this belief coming out of us, as you put it, that IO psych tradition, in my language, the organizational development tradition, where those managers are powerful. The ratio of managers to subordinates is the closest ratio in the firm. I mean, it's obviously much smaller than the ratio of HR people to subordinates, or even executives, however you want to cut it. That should be the cultural spine. Completely disengaged from the design and change processes. And I want to say we can't see any impact on the bank's performance.
Sorry, why do you think that they are being treated in that way? In other words, they're being treated like employees who don't have managerial accountabilities.
They're finding out about change or things that affect them and their team and their colleagues and the people around them at the same time as the people who report to them, and at the same time as the people they report to. So there is
That
no.
doesn't sound like a change program that's well managed or led.
Again, I wonder if our old notions of what is well managed and well led mean now. And I want to be very clear. I want to loop it back to Cecil. This is happening in particular organizational forms. So where work has been standardized, that's where the biggest casualty layers are. And I think in those standardized work environments like banking, where there are thousands, literally, of people that are increasingly just doing standardized work, it's not just the managers that are being, less and less of the managerial coordination work is human to human. Most of that coordination work is now digitized. And eventually the team itself is cut off and left and gone. And I think that we're in some great flux in all of the standardized work, standardized skills spaces. Some of them are just early phase and some of them are more advanced. And we see it in some headlines, 10,000 jobs here, 20,000 jobs there. That's because coordination and work are shifting. And there again, I like the qualification you put on judgment, because clearly there's some judgment happening when an AI is able to take over a work process, some form of judgment. So where does this take us? I want to figure out, how does this take us beyond the conversation of, hey, AI is costing jobs? I want to come back to what's left for the manager. What is it that managers will remain and survive doing? And I think the obvious point, firstly, is if there's no team, there's no need for a manager. So if that job has been processed out, if that work is so standardized that there's going to be no manager anymore, there's an inevitability to that. What's left? And what would be left is work where you run on standardized norms, not on standardized processes or skills. That's where managers would remain. There would still be work on standardized outputs. But, if I zoom in here a little, I suspect that the dream of self-managed teams is being strengthened by the arrival of the information age and AI. There's less reliance on the manager, but you still need somebody, to manage the human dynamics of those teams so that they don't implode. And that might be an emergent leader, it might be an unofficial leader.
An informal leader. Sorry.
An informal leader, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the inside the team stuff. Informal leadership can cover that. But then you still got the across the organization and into the outside world problems, because teams can become so navel-gazing. They focus on their output only, and they disconnect and silo out, so they spin away. So somebody has to manage the cross-linking and still organizational identity, cohesion, and then any outside world stuff that might be beyond the team. So there's work there for managers, but maybe they're managing multiple teams, not linked or embedded into any single one. So what are we hearing? Overused, maybe overused is the traditional observation, standardization of roles, standardization of tasks. It's going to be passing on to AI. And Cecil, I suspect you might be then coaching more and more people who are in career transitions out of one managerial role into another, or out of one industry, and trying to find an industry that's going to survive. Our perspective, there's still coordination work in teams, but the old conversations we used to have in purposeful teams where Varsha, rightly pointed out over and over again, purpose, 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 mandate, purpose, then have a plan, then structure the roles, then develop your priorities and make sure your boundaries are clear and you can run a team. I suspect that the mix changes. I suspect that mandates move too quickly presently. And so teams that talk in our offering set, which is more about intact teams based on personality, communication, conflict, trust, accountability. I guess the work I'm hearing you're doing, Cecil, with a lot of teams is here in that space, the relational dynamics. And then in practical management, we're left with analyzing who's going to be doing the doing. Is it still humans or is it AI? Who does the dealing? Are we going to have AI negotiating with AI for resource allocations, or do we still need human? Who leads? And here maybe, Varsha, Jimmy, that leadership possibly is a uniquely human endeavor. And I say possibly because depending on whose book on leadership you're reading, maybe some of it could be digital. Who's doing the linking? Who's doing the communicating? Who's doing the controlling? And you can start to break down how's coordination happening? Where does it become digital? Where do we rely on human? Thanks for joining us today, guys. I'm really sorry if you were hoping for a bigger group, because sometimes being in a bigger group makes you feel like secure and less visible and less vulnerable. But you stayed to be in a small group conversation, much more intimate. Follow us on WorldsView Academy. Join us at LeaderX. We're hosting a little booth in the name of organizational development. And there's a series of conversations. Liesel is spearheading that, and we've got volunteers from different settings joining us as co-hosts and co-facilitators.
Dumisani is one of them.
Dumisani is one of them. We'll be at LeaderX on the 2nd of September. Come and find us, or come to the next cafe, which is now diving right into the devil's lair. We're going to dive into the pit of the beast and talk about managing information metrics and managerial attentions. I don't know if you have any words in closing.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. It's a topic we don't often think about, and it's a topic that we need to reflect a bit more on. So thank you for that inspiring conversation today. And I may not have been attending your cafes, the last couple of years, but I do find your newsletters to be very informative. So thank you for that.
Yay!
I still
Thank you,
do look at them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. If anybody else wants to say something, now's the moment. Otherwise, we'll say goodbye.
No, just lovely. Thanks very much. I appreciated it a lot, Craig. This week I read an engineer, a leading AI engineer in China, saying one of the leaders, wakes up in the morning so anxious. He says, I wake up and the world has changed. So if that's happening to him in the AI space, where he is in fact leading AI globally, it's no surprise that we're kind of a little bit downstream from that and just seeing things rapidly changing. Even our whole models and thinking about OD and organizations is just shifting quickly. So love the conversation for that reason.
Appreciate you guys so much. Thank you. Let's think clearly and critically about what does it mean to manage today and tomorrow. We'll pick it up next month.
Cheers.